Hey guys, GuitarAnimal.com here, Trent. Going to show you today how to restring a Les Paul guitar. There's the Les Paul, the Guitar Animal Les Paul you see in a lot of the videos. And I'm going to go over how to restring a Les Paul. As first in a series, I'm going to show you how to restring all types of guitars. We'll do Stratocasters, Telecasters, guitars that have locking tremolos, acoustic guitars, maybe even a 12-string, might even get crazy into a bass. But today, we're going to do a Les Paul. So I'm going to lead you through all this, and hopefully after you see this video, you'll be able to do it yourself. Alright, so the first thing we need to do when we're going to restring your Les Paul is we need to take the strings off. Now I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but on Les Paul guitars, the tailpiece and the bridge are held on by the strings. So if I just take off all 6 strings, this is going to go sliding off the end of your guitar, could scratch the top, and this is going to fall off as soon as I move the guitar. Try to turn it over, it's going to fall off as well. Also, these little wheels here adjust the height of the strings on your Les Paul, and if you don't have tension pushing down on the bridge, it can move as well, and we don't want that because then your guitar is not going to play right when you put the new strings on it. So what I suggest, let's take off strings 1 through 5, leaving string 6 on there just to kind of hold it together. Then we'll put the 5th string on from the new set, and then we can go ahead and take off that old string. You just have to kind of pay attention to what you're doing. You don't want to put a new string on the 5th. You don't want to cut your new strings, so just be careful when you're doing this. All right, so I'm going to remove strings 1 through 5. You just do that at this end. I would recommend a peg winder, one of these guys. Not as big of a deal taking the strings off, but it is definitely a big deal putting the strings on if you don't have one of those. So we're just going to loosen the strings up. Also, while you're working with your Les Paul, do not let the back of the headstock rest on anything. It puts too much tension on this area right here under the nut, and Les Pauls are prone to breakage there. So we're going to be careful how we're working with this. This is why I have it hanging over the edge of the bench here today. Alright, so we're just going to loosen up those strings. Make them nice and loose before we cut them. Alright, strings 1 through 5 are loose. I'm going to take a pair of wire cutters. Now don't do this over your pickups. Your pickups are magnets, and when you cut the string, little metal particles can fly off of the string and they'll stick right to the top of your pickups and eventually find their way on the top of your guitar and scratch your guitar. So cut them down here in the fretboard area. Again, strings 1 through 5. Over here, we're just going to feed them down the top here. Grab them all together and just right on and away from the guitar. Go ahead and coil those up and get rid of them. Alright. On this end, we just uncoil these straight up and away. Hopefully no one tied your strings on. We don't tie strings on the guitar headstock, regardless of what people tell you on the internet. All you're going to have to do with that is fight to get them off, and probably end up scratching the face of your headstock trying to get them off. There's no reason to tie them on. If you coil them enough times, they're not going to slip, so don't tie them on. Alright, now while you have this headstock open, you might want to dust it off. It usually gets dusty under the strings. You can just take a paper towel and a little bit of guitar polish. Again, there could be some metal up here, so be careful not to pick up metal particles and rub them around on the guitar. Just chase them right off of the face of the guitar. Just lightly. Alright, there we go. So that's nice and clean. And we're ready to start putting the strings on. We're going to leave the 6th string on. Again, it's holding my bridge, holding my tailpiece right where I need them to be. I use this brand of strings, the Ernie Ball 9s. Again, we talked about gauges. Make sure you're replacing your strings with the same gauge that was on the guitar. If you want to change gauges of strings, you'll need to have your guitar set up by your guitar shop or your luthier, because there's adjustments that need to be made on the guitar to make it work with different gauges of strings. Now, my 6th string is a 42 gauge, so I'm going to set that one aside. I'll go ahead and grab my 5th string, my 32, and I'm going to put it on first, and then I'll get rid of this last old string. Just want to carefully unwind the string from the pack. You don't want to kink the string. And one other thing, a little bit dusty under here where we play. Good time to chase that out of there while the strings are out of the way, maybe at the top of the pickups. All right, now for the Les Paul, we come in this direction on the tailpiece and up over the bridge. Now there is another way to do it. You can run the string this way and then back over the top of the tailpiece. That will actually lessen this cutting angle here over the bridge and make the strings a little bit softer feeling up this way. Billy Gibbons for ZZ Top does that. You can do it. I will tell you, it will imprint the top of your tailpiece, so after you do it that way, you won't be able to do it the other way without seeing all those marks and scratches on the top of your tailpiece. So make sure you're aware of that before you do it. I don't really care for that, so I'm going to go this direction, just a standard way to use the tailpiece. And we're going to bring that, feed the string all the way through, make sure it's firmly seated in the back, and it goes over your bridge piece right there, your saddle, right? There should be a notch there. And then we'll come down to this end. I'm going to feed the end through the pin on the tuner. Now this is a little bit of a guessing game. We're trying to guess how much string I can get to wrap on this pin before I have too much and it's trying to rub the face of the nut on the tuner. I'm guessing on the 5th string about this much. I'm going to position my tuner in such a way that the string going through the pin is about a 45-degree angle to the nut, so when I pull against it, it doesn't slip back through the tuner. I'll just push this up, the string up, so it's out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and use my peg winder to just ease that string on. The first time it coils past itself, you want to make sure that it's coiling downward towards the face of the headstock. And I'm just going to feed that on there. I'm not holding this tight enough to kink it, but I'm holding it fairly tight. Just tighten it up. Make sure before I tighten it up, this is still where it's supposed to be, in the notch in the saddle. I'll check. I've got about 3, almost 4 wraps on that string, and that's good for a 5th string. So now that we have that, we'll go ahead and remove the last old string, which was my 6th string. Remember, we just left it on there to hold the bridge together. Now they have the new 5th string on there. It's not needed anymore. All right, we'll loosen that string up. We'll cut it. Take it out of the bridge, the tailpiece. Make sure you keep track of all these string parts that you're cutting off. They're like little needles. You'll find them later. All right, going to the 42 gauge string. It's my 6th string. We're going to go through the tailpiece, up over the bridge, firmly seated. Go through my tuner. Guessing about how much length I'll be able to wrap on there. This is a thicker string, so I won't be able to wrap quite as much because it's thicker. It'll take more of the space on the pin of the tuner. I'm going to wrap this down, holding just enough tension, making sure it's spiraling downward towards the face of the headstock, and spiral it on. Made sure it was in the notch on my bridge before I tightened it, and I check it to see if I've got enough wraps, and that looks good. So we're going to move on and do the 4th string. 4th string is a 24. The W stands for wound. That means it's actually a wound string. It has a 2nd winding around the core string. I'm going to go into the 4th string slot here, up towards the headstock. This hole wasn't in the right orientation, so I just moved it. This one will be able to hold a little bit more string because it's thinner. Now, the reason that I'm using a peg winder, if I don't have a peg winder, you'll be doing this for about 100 turns, which can be really difficult, make it really difficult to form the coil that you're wanting to form on that tuner. So a peg winder is really essential for putting the string on. Makes taking the string off nice too, but putting it on, you really want to have it. All right, so we just wind it on there. Make sure it's seated on both ends, in the nut and in the slot on the bridge saddle. All right. I did not mention this, but on a Les Paul, the 3 bass strings will wind from the center and out in this direction, and the 3 treble strings will wind from the center and out in the opposite direction around the tuning machine. So you want to make sure you're putting them on the same way they were when you took them off. I'm going to go ahead and take this time and cut off the excess string. They're sharp on the end, so it's good to just go ahead and get rid of those. All right, those 3 out of the way. Now we're going to go to our 3rd string. This is probably one of the hardest strings to deal with because it's thick and it's a plain core wire, so it kinks very easily. We want to make sure we do not kink the string or bend it anywhere over the playing surface, or it will not play correctly. All right, firmly seated on this end. We'll go through the tuner, the slot in the tuner. Now I have to do this in the opposite direction. Pull this up. Again, I'm holding tension. It's a thinner string than the other one, so it can have more length available to be wrapped onto the headstock. Make sure it's spiraling downward, and just spiral it up onto the, coil it up onto the tuner. Before it tightens up, make sure it's in the nut and it's in the slot on the bridge. There we go. We're on to the second string, the 11. Again, this is a 9-gauge set, so it goes 9, 11, 16, 24, 32, 42. If you're using a different gauge string set, you may have different numbers. All right, we're on the second string. It can hold even more. And spiral it on. Make sure it coils down towards the face of the headstock. The first time it passes itself, you really need to make sure that it's going downward. Once it does that, as long as you hold some tension on it, it should continue to wrap downward. I am holding the string down towards the face of the headstock, but I'm not pushing it against the headstock. My little finger's not pushing that against the wood, but almost. Just keep it that direction. And we check the bridge in. Yes, where we're supposed to be. All right. Okay, we'll go for the first string. Very thin string here. Again, we do not have to tie these on. You just want to make sure you have at least 5 wraps or more on the first and second string around the tuning post. That way they won't slip. All right. Now we're just going to wind it on. You can see, even with a peg winder, wrapping this many wraps on the first and second string takes a little bit of time. All right. So the end of the strings should look like this. Let me cut those off there so you can take a close look at them. The end of the string should look about like this. You can see they're from the center to the outside, and they're in opposite directions. The first 3 strings and the last 3 strings are in opposite directions. So strings 1, 2, and 3 are coiling one direction, and strings 4, 5, and 6 are coiling the opposite direction. You can see how many wraps I have on there. We have at least 5 or 6 wraps on the first and second string. Third string probably has 4 or 5. I probably have 4 or 5 on the 4th string, about 4 on the 5th string, and 3 on the 6th string. There's a section of the tuner that is actually concave that's made to hold the string. Once you come out of that concave section of the pin and you go back to the flat part, that's indicating you really have too much string on there, and you need to take a little bit more string off. All right, so after we have them on the guitar, we want to stretch the strings out. The way that we do that, we're going to hold the strings here, we're going to grab them and just kind of pull them. What that does is it takes a little bit of stretch out of the strings, and it also makes sure they're firmly seated on both ends. If you're not sure whether or not you got the strings too tight or have the strings too tight, you may want to check on your tuner real quick how tight you are. I just know that these aren't quite to pitch. I'm just familiar with them. So we go through them a couple times and stretch them out. Once we do that, I'll put a tuner on it here. I just use one of these Snark tuners, just goes on the headstock, works really well. But you can use any tuner you like. I'm tuning this one standard today, so of course first string is going to be E. Second string will be tuned to B. Third string will go up to G. Fourth string is D. Fifth string is A. And then E on the sixth string. You have to go over these 2 or 3 times because you had all that tension off the neck, having those strings off, and now we're just loading the neck again, putting the tension back on it. So wood takes a minute or two to adjust to that. What I typically do is I'll tune it 2 or 3 times. I'll play it just for a couple minutes and then tune it again. So smack it a little bit. Some bends. And then we'll just go back to tuning again. See how much it went out of tune. For the next day or so, it might go out of tune a little bit more than normal, but once you've stretched it, they should stay in tune pretty well. So the big thing to really remember on a Les Paul is that your bridge and your tailpiece are held on by the strings. That's important. If you don't leave a string on when you're changing your strings, always have at least one string on the guitar, you will end up with those bridge and tailpiece falling off, and then you'll probably be bringing the whole pile of parts to a guitar shop and have them put it back together for you. So you want to avoid that. Now, sometimes you want to oil the fingerboard. And obviously you don't want to oil the fingerboard when the strings are on it, but the way that you can do that is when you took the first 5 strings off and left the old 6th string on, you could go ahead and oil the fingerboard. You could detune the 6th string enough to push it to the side to be able to get oil under it, and we wouldn't really care about getting oil on that old string because it's getting ready to come off. So we could do that. I didn't oil the fingerboard on this today. You only need to do that maybe once a year or twice a year. But that's the way we would work around that. But again, brand new set of strings. Sounds great. They're in tune. All right, so Guitar Animals Les Paul is back up and running. Sounds great. Ready to shoot some more videos. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to restring your Gibson Les Paul or any Les Paul style guitar. Just make sure to remember to keep one string on when you're changing those strings out so you don't have all your parts fall off of it. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out again, guitaranimal.com. This is Trent. Have a good one.